So for today's Dharma talk, we're going to talk about right speech. And right speech is one of the elements of the Eightfold Path that the Buddha laid out in his earliest of teachings. And it's one element of 8 elements that help us to eliminate suffering and to cultivate awakening. So for today's Dharma talk, I want to start out with some familiar lyrics, a kid's song that we all know by heart. And it's something my mom shared with me when I first started going to school. And you may all know this one. Sticks and stones may break my bones. Now, it has a nice sentiment. We know this song, but in reality, we know that words can hurt and that words can be used as weapons to hurt deeply. I like these lines better that I came up on my own, and I thought at first they were super original, but I found out later that they were not. As the Ecclesiastes, the preacher, says in the Old Testament, vanity and vexation of spirit, there is no new thing under the sun. So the made-up lyrics that were not as original as I thought. Sticks and stones will break my bones, but your words will break my heart. Now, these are some lyrics from a song from some years ago, and I really appreciate these lines from John David Anderson, who wrote a book called Posted, is the title of the book. Quote, I know what you're going to say, sticks and stones and broken bones, but words can kick you in the gut. They wriggle underneath your skin and start to itch. They set their hooks into you and pull. Words accumulate like a cancer and then eat away at you until there's nothing left. And once they are let loose, there really is no taking them back. End quote. Some years ago, I dated a very angry and mean woman, though to me she was mostly nice. Until the end of the relationship, as the relationship started to wane. And she told me that when she was young and other girls would bully her, she quickly learned the power of a cutting, mean, hurtful word. She realized that hitting someone didn't do anything, but cutting to someone's heart with words could make even the strongest girl cower. She learned that lesson early, as have some of us. I appreciate this quote from Isaac Marion, the author of The Burning World. Quote, I don't have to be a monster to hurt people. I can do it gently with a single careless breath. End quote. I am aware, and my hope is that we become more aware that we all struggle with this, especially in the charged times we are living. We use words carelessly all the time. We may not even be aware of the impact of our words to hurt others. Years ago, one day I was sitting in a bar with some friends, and there was somebody sitting with us, and he was giving me the stink eye. And I didn't remember the kid. I had no idea who he was. And he all of a sudden just said, I remember you. I looked up to you. You were a poet, and I was sharing the poetry I was reading, and you badmouthed it. And you badmouthed me for liking it. Sadly, I don't remember. He got up and left because he was still so hurt by a careless remark so many years ago that I don't even remember. Talk about karma. For those of us who think our speech is good, it's not just about saying nice things. Ask yourself about how often you talk about other people when they're not around. We call that gossip. And we all do it. Here we are ascribing their motivation and action when we have gossip. Their motivation actions based on what? Could even harmless gossiping turn into harmful speech? The Buddha calls this divisive speech, idle chatter. One definition of gossip is speaking about someone who is not physically present. Of course, the context changes depending on our job role or responsibilities. But even that being said, we want to be mindful. Would we say what we're saying to them, to their faces? And if not, why are we sharing it? I appreciate these words from Alan Locos, and they've stayed with me a long time. Quote, "It doesn't matter whether what is said is positive or negative. If the person is not there, it is gossip. If we have to speak about someone who is not present, we should speak of them as if though they were there." An exercise that I do once or twice a year is to designate a specific period of time, a week or a month, when I do not speak about anyone who is not present. I find that my voice gets quite a rest, and part of my ego that believes I do not gossip gets quite a jolt. End quote. I just love that. It's funny how hard this can be to practice. It is so habitual. We do it all the time. And most of the time, we're not even aware that we're doing it. A friend of mine, when she was 8, was dancing in her room, laughing and having fun. When her mom walked in and said, "Don't do that. You're not a good dancer. You are so awkward. Just don't." She carried that with her all the way into her adult life, and those words still hurt and stung. Our words also can do harm when we label people like they are objects in a museum, never allowing them to change. You are always this. You are always that. When we are stuck with a label, no matter how much we change or try to change, others want to keep us pinned down or labeled. So we do not have to engage with them or see them as they really are, not just as a part of our constructive narrative that gives us the illusion of control over our changing world. This is especially true these days within our political discourse and the rise of hate speech. I think that we all know from our own experience that words have the power to heal or wound. As humans, we are worded beings. We engage with the world through the abstraction of language. This thing we call us is in itself a language-created story. So it makes sense that words can both heal and harm, and at the same time reveal and hide. Our very existence is a language existed, verbal and nonverbal. Is that why we long so desperately to be deeply listened to be heard? We say each Sunday, "May my words be healing." For that to be true, we need to cultivate right speech. When the Buddha went forth, from his awakening, he came with the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path was a map. The directions out of suffering, attachment, disappointment, and towards wisdom, compassion, and freedom. Meditation is what everyone first thinks of when they think of Buddhist practice. This is rather a seemingly passive image. But meditation, mindfulness, is so much more than just sitting. Just sitting helps us in our aspiration to embody the traits of a Buddha. So is it so surprising that on the path would be the cultivation of a healing and compassionate speech, of a mindful, wise speech as part of our journey toward awakening? One of the practices the Buddha taught for the cessation of suffering and to bring ourselves to awakening was the practice of right speech. And this is how the Buddha describes it. Quote, "What is right speech? Abstaining from lying, from divisive speech, from abusive speech, and from idle chatter. This is called right speech." End quote. Just looking at this definition, we can see that right speech is a mindfulness practice. Because to do what the Buddha has asked, we must be mindful of our thoughts and our tongue. He goes on to teach, quote, "One should speak only that word by which one would not torment oneself nor harm others. That word is indeed well spoken. One should speak only pleasant words, words which are acceptable to others. What one speaks without bringing evil to others is pleasant. And abandoning abusive speech, he abstains from abusive speech. He speaks words that are soothing to the ear, that are affectionate, that go to the heart, that are polite, appealing, and pleasing to people at large." End quote. If we think about our current social and political situation, we can agree most of the time we are practicing the opposite of right speech. At the same time, the Buddha is not saying we never say something disagreeable or unendearing. But another person, just like we are, we need to be aware of our timing when we do. More on that in a moment. So what are some of the causes and effects of wrong speech? Much of our wrong speech is simply suffering, or suffering disguised as anger, or suffering disguised as grief. I lash out at you or say something that might or will be taken negatively or hurtfully. Why am I doing that? These days, there is a lot of shaming going on about masks, about wokeness. Why do we try to shame others? Is that we have learned that? Is it that we have learned that as children? We are in the midst of a fight with a loved one, and we say something really hurtful. And since they are a loved one, they are someone who has felt safe enough to be vulnerable around us. So we know their soft spots and we jab. Maybe it's time for us to be honest with ourselves and with them that we felt hurt, so we wanted to hurt them back. We intentionally hurt the ones we love. Is not that an example of the cycle of repetitive suffering, samsara itself? This is something that the Buddha taught. Part of mindfulness is contemplation, reflection, acknowledgement, and confession. I love this, and this is from the Buddha, from the Pali Canon. Quote, having performed a verbal act, you should reflect upon it. If on reflection you know that it led to self-affliction, to the affliction of others, or both, if an unskillful verbal act had painful consequences, painful results, then you should confess it, reveal it, lay it open to the teacher or acknowledgeable companion in the holy life. Having confessed it, you should exercise restraint in the future. But if on reflection you know that it did not lead to affliction, it was a skillful verbal action with happy consequences, happy results, then you should stay mentally refreshed and joyful, training day and night in skillful mental qualities. End quote. So we learn from this that right speech is a training day and night, that we practice this, that we train in rightful speech, that we're going to fail, and we start again. We practice again. Now, part of this quote, he says in the very beginning about reflection, did it do self-affliction? Let us think about right speech as also right speech and self-talk. We can apply the teachings of the Buddha in our conversations with ourselves. And are we practicing right speech when we have a dialogue with ourselves? Do we say healing words to ourselves, or do we say hurtful words to ourselves? So one thing about right speech is that this practice is one of the most fruitful and one of the most challenging in Buddhist practice. And I've been thinking about right speech and practice and our preconceptions and attachments we have to our own Buddhist practice. Again, our practice tends to be all focused on meditation. How many of us have criticized our own practice because we don't do it right or do it enough, or we criticize others because they don't meditate enough or do it right, or because their practice is not the same as ours. How many of us have ever thought that right speech, as one teacher put it, as being the wholehearted expression of Buddhist practice? How can something so straightforward that anyone can practice it be the wholehearted expression of Buddhist practice? I believe because it's at the heart of a mindfulness practice. I love this from Beth Roth, quote, right speech is mindfulness practice. By undertaking this practice, we commit to greater awareness of our body, mind, and emotions. We learn to restrain our speech in moments of anger, hostility, or confusion, and over time, to train the heart to more frequently incline towards wholesome states such as love, kindness, and empathy. From these heart states, right speech naturally arises. End quote. We start the practice of right speech in silence. We can only practice right speech if we're truly listening to another. These lines from Thich Nhat Hanh express just this, quote, deep listening is the foundation of right speech. If we cannot listen mindfully, we cannot practice right speech. No matter what we say, it will not be mindful because we'll be speaking only of our own ideas and not in response to another person, end quote. Many of us struggle with listening deeply because we are constantly speaking our own ideas and not in response to the other person. We are always responding, and not seeking understanding. Maybe we speak our own ideas louder and louder because no one is listening to us and has never noticed who we are. Maybe we say hurtful things because we feel like no one is listening. And sometimes I think we are so in need to have someone listen to us that we never notice that we're not listening also. To practice right speech, we start from a place of deep listening. Right speech and right listening are two sides of the same coin. In the Shuragama Sutra, Kuan Yin uses deep listening to realize and attain enlightenment. Manjurshi, the Buddha of wisdom, says to this technique, it surpasses all other Dharma doors in existence. There are some good links I can share about this practice. But deep listening, right speech can lead us to awakening. Again, I appreciate these lines from Beth Rogan, again on deep and right listening. Quote, listen with your body, your heart, your eyes, your energy, your total presence. Listen in silence without interrupting. And I love this part especially. Fill any spaces of silence between you with love. End quote. How often do we do this? Mostly we listen not to understand, but to respond, and we don't fill up those spaces, those silence between us with love. We need to turn this habitual way of listening that we do around. We do that when we fill the spaces of silence between us with love. We can begin to really practice our aspiration for right speech when we do this. Here are some basic guidelines on right speech that the Buddha himself laid out for us. And these are the words of the Tathagata, another name for the Buddha. And these are found in the Abhayāha Sutta in the Pali Canon. And I will post these on Facebook once our gathering is done. The criteria for deciding what is worth saying. In quote, in the case of words that the Tathagata knows to be unfactual, untrue, unbeneficial, or not connected with the goal, unendearing and disagreeable to others, he does not say them. In the case of words that the Tathagata knows to be factual, true, unbeneficial, unendearing, and disagreeable to others, he does not say them. In the case of words that the Tathagata knows to be factual, true, beneficial, but unendearing and disagreeable to others, he has a sense of the proper time in saying them. In the case of the words that the Tathagata knows to be unfactual, untrue, unbeneficial, but endearing and agreeable to others, he does not say them. In the case of the words that the Tathagata knows to be factual, true, unbeneficial, but endearing and agreeable to others, he does not say them. In the case of words that the Tathagata knows to be factual, true, beneficial, and endearing and agreeable to others, he has a sense of the proper time to say them. Why is that? Because the Tathagata has sympathy for living beings. End quote. If there is one practice that you really want to start, or you want to jumpstart your practice, I highly recommend this straightforward and powerful practice that everyone can do. And I want to close by putting all of what we just said in a beautiful, succinct way. And I want to use the words of Rumi, the poet, to do that. Quote, "Before you speak, let your words pass through 3 gates. At the first gate, ask yourself, is it true? At the second gate, ask, is it necessary? And at the third gate, ask, is it kind?" May our practice include words that are healing. May our words be healing in our community and in our broader community and in all that we come in contact with. May we speak healing words, and may we do that through our capacity to listen deeply and to fill the silence and spaces we share with love. Namo Amida Butsu.